Australia's economy, it's actually really struggling right now. The Australian government thinks it has a solution. They're going to tax electric cars. Now, this is not what's happened in the past. In the past, there's been like local governments that have tried to tax electric cars. That was actually taken to the High Court and found to be illegal. But now the federal Australian government plans on doing this because it's afraid it's going to lose tax dollars on the sale of fuel. Well, obviously, if people are not buying fuel, not buying gasoline, which is, we call it petrol here in Australia, and if they're not buying diesel, then the government doesn't get all the tax that goes to that fuel. However, this is all a bit of a scam. In fact, it's a huge scam. And I'm going to explain to you exactly why that is. But first, here are the details on the Australian government's massive tax grab on electric car owners. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. I'm really disappointed to see this. I'm really disappointed. I did not think that this government was likely to do this, but it appears as though whoever's elected, whether that's the Liberal government or the Labor government here in Australia, it appears as though both of them plan on taxing EV owners. A tax on electric cars is closer than ever, say experts, and this time as a national Australia-wide measure. Now, that was after Victoria, the state that I used to be from. Their version was struck down by the High Court with the aim of recouping falling revenue from fewer motorists purchasing petrol and diesel. I mean, right now I almost never purchase petrol or diesel, gasoline or diesel, because I just use my solar panels to charge my EV. In fact, 99% of my charging is from my solar. A national tax on electric vehicle drivers, a road user charge, will bill drivers per kilometre travelled, and it's said to be a priority for the federal government, which may rely on the current party being elected for a second term. Now, I think this is a terrible idea for a few reasons, but I'll get to that in a second. It's being pitched to fill the gap in Australia's budget left by declining revenues from the fuel excise, which is the tax on the sale of petrol and diesel that is intended to fund roads as more drivers switch to low and zero emissions cars. Now, keep in mind, guys, that when it comes to roads, no one pays their fair share. The truth is, if you own a car, you're not paying your fair share. You're paying more than you should. If the tax is about the roads being repaired or fixed or improved or built, you're paying more than your fair share, because about 97% of the damage done on roads in the United States, Australia, and the UK is actually done by trucks, by large trucks. Now, the reason that most damage happens on roads is because when it rains, trucks drive over the rain, compressing the water into the road, and that's where you get potholes. So you'll find if you have a driveway and it's made of asphalt, bitumen, and you just drive on it yourself, you don't have trucks driving in that driveway, it'll last for a very, very long time. In many cases, it'll last for more than 10 years. But if there's trucks driving on that road, it won't last for very long. So the majority of the damage is actually done by a very small percentage of the traffic that drive on roads. But most people don't know that. The other thing worth mentioning is actually the taxes that come from petrol and gasoline or diesel. They don't actually contribute to building the roads, but that's another story. I'll get to that as well. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers reportedly told a Business Council of Australia dinner in Canberra last week an EV road user charge is on the agenda and that apparently it's going to happen. It is speculated the tax would not be introduced until after this year's federal election, assuming the current federal government wins a second term. Such a tax would need to be a national initiative, as a road user charge on electric and plug-in hybrid cars introduced by the Victorian state government was scrapped in 2023 after the High Court ruled it was a duty of excise or an illegal tax. They said only the federal government can actually impose that kind of tax. So the federal government will be able to do this and no one will be able to challenge this in the High Court. Treasurer Chalmers had previously expressed interest in an EV road user charge, but the latest report suggests it has been pushed up the agenda. He's quoted as telling attendees of the dinner the drop in fuel excise revenue is one of the challenges that needs addressing and that we need to pay for roads somehow. Basically, the government is not making enough money. Australia is, well, we're importing more stuff than we're exporting, essentially. It's despite previous reports suggesting a significant portion of fuel excise revenue is actually not spent on building, upgrading, and maintaining roads. And the media have talked about that. So, I mean, people say you should pay your fair share because that's what goes to building the roads. It's not actually true. Parliamentary Budget Office figures cited by the AFR show Treasury predicts the fuel excise to account for 3.9% of total tax revenue in the 2024-25 financial year, down from 7.4% in 1999-2000. Close to 92,000 fully electric cars were reported as sold last year, or around 7.4% of all cars. And obviously these vehicles don't use petrol, they don't use diesel, so they are not, these car owners are not having to pay the taxes we pay when we purchase fuel. In some states, electric vehicles do pay reduced or no stamp duty at the time of purchase, and many models are eligible for national fringe benefits tax exemptions on novated leases, both sources of revenue for state and federal governments. The AFR reports the Parliamentary Budget Office has predicted revenue from the fuel excise of effectively zero in 2050, based on a CSIRO forecast of 97% of new car sales being electric by that date. Which is awesome news, isn't it? The CSIRO, which is an official arm of the government, are saying that 97% of new car sales in 2050 will be fully electric. Now, I think it's going to be 100% in 2035, but you guys know I'm an optimist. Now, it's said while machinery and some large vehicles may still be powered by fossil fuels, I think that's unlikely, but it's said it may be possible, these will still receive fuel tax credits offsetting some of the tax. And here's the really, really crazy part about this whole story. There is actually $10 billion invested by the government every single year into fuel tax credits of some sort. In the financial year from 2023 to 2024, there was an increase of 31% in fossil fuel subsidies in Australia. In fact, the total was $14.5 billion or $27,581 for every single minute of the day for the entire year. $27,581 into fossil fuel credits. Basically, the government invested that amount of money, $14.5 billion. So there's a hell of a lot of money, right, going into these fossil fuel tax credits. And really, it shows you that, to some measure, this is kind of the public being hoodwinked or tricked into thinking that actually, the problem is EV owners, right? The problem is EV owners not paying their fair share. Now, keep in mind that, internal combustion engine cars cause immense damage. They do. The emissions from these vehicles causes all kinds of health problems. Now, even if you're a mad hatter and you're maybe a bit of a crazy person, you claim that internal combustion engine fumes don't kill you, well, I'd challenge you to lock yourself up in your garage, leave your engine on, just do that for a couple of weeks and see how long you last and see what happens to you. I'm pretty sure no one's actually going to do that because they do know it is actually going to hurt you, right? So EVs on the roads will prevent a lot of hospital cases. That's a big part of the reason why China wanted to go electric, right? Wanted to clean up its air. It knows that it's an enormous cost on the population and on the government to have so many people having all these health problems in China. I mean, cancer is actually very, very high rates of cancer in China as well. And they've, in fact, doubled over the last 25 years. So the Chinese government knows, right? Get rid of all these internal combustion cars. We will save billions and billions of dollars on health costs. So, of course, the government are ignoring the fact that this will actually help improve Australians' health. A spokesman for the Treasurer told the AFR late last week, "We will work with the states and territories on policies in this area following the decision in the High Court, but we'll do it in a considered and consultative way and take the time to get it right. Now, obviously, who knows what that means? I'm going to guess that the government's going to say, we need the money. This is what the tax is going to be. You've got to pay it. Now, the biggest problem with this, in my opinion, it's not so much the money. It's sending the message to EV owners. We're going to give you an extra tax, and you're going to have to do an extra job that you don't have to do if you drive an internal combustion car, right? The government is basically saying to people, you drive a diesel or petrol car, you don't have to keep a logbook. That is a major pain in the ass. Having to keep a logbook. That's the whole point. That's how they can prove, right, that you've driven your car and make you pay the taxes by you keeping a logbook for all the kilometers and all the driving you've done. And therefore, that is going to add an extra level of work for people who own an EV. It's basically sending the kind of message to say, well, getting an EV, it's going to be hassle for you. Don't even bother. That's what I think anyway. The federal opposition has reportedly left the door open to a road user charge on EVs as well, while the Greens are said to oppose this policy. Basically, both sides of government are going to impose these taxes. Victoria's road user charge came into force on the 1st of July 2021 and charged a 2.8% tax on every kilometre driven by battery electric or hydrogen-powered vehicles, or 2.3 cents per kilometre for plug-in hybrids. It was criticised for taxing plug-in hybrids twice, as drivers were required to pay fuel excise when filling up with petrol, as well as the road user charge, irrespective of whether they were driving their vehicle on petrol or electric power. Prior to the axing of the Victorian taxes, New South Wales announced plans for a charge of 2.9 cents per kilometre driven by electric and hydrogen cars, not that anyone owns any hydrogen cars, and 80% of that, 2.3 cents per kilometre for plug-in hybrids. These figures are likely to be indexed higher now because of the policy's proposed introduction date, which is the 1st of July 2027, or when EVs, defined as electric, plug-in hybrid, and hydrogen cars, make up 30% of new vehicle sales, whichever occurs first. It remains to be seen if the New South Wales government would proceed with the plan, given it would open itself up to a High Court challenge like Victoria. Now, guys, if the New South Wales government does proceed with this plan in 2027, I personally will take them to the High Court. I can guarantee you, I promise you I'll do that. And I hope that some of you will join me in that case. Australian Automobile Association CEO Michael Bradley told the AFR an EV road user charge is a can that's been kicked down the road for too long already, and that political challenges of motoring tax reform only get harder the longer politicians dither and avoid. In other words, the Australian Automobile Association is trying to push this tax through. He thinks Australians who drive electric cars should pay a tax for every kilometre or every mile that they drive. And it should be done immediately. Yeah, I mean, why would the Australian automotive industry CEO say that? Well, because he's protecting his interests. Who are his interests? Toyota, do they sell any EVs? No. Volkswagen, do they sell any EVs? No. Ford, do they sell any EVs? Minuscule percentage. Australian Electric Vehicle Association President Chris Jones said in a media statement last month that any national road user charge should replace the fuel excise entirely and apply to all vehicles. A universal mass distance road user charge should eventually replace fuel excise as the user pays component of roads and their maintenance. This should also be extended to heavy vehicles, as trucks are responsible for the bulk of road damage, he said. Australia's two most popular family vehicles, the Ford Ranger and the Toyota Hilux Utes, tip the scales at well over 2 tonnes, and neither of them are electric cars. So a lot of people say, well, EVs cause road damage because they're heavier than internal combustion engine cars. But here's the thing, the most popular internal combustion engine vehicle, or the most popular vehicles, period, in Australia, they're all utes, right? It's the Mitsubishi Triton, that's often 3rd or 4th place. The Ford Ranger, it's either 1st or 2nd. And the Toyota Hilux, which is either 1st or 2nd with the Ranger. So the Ranger and the Hilux are the two most popular vehicles in Australia and have been for years. And as you can imagine, they're 2.5 tonnes. They're heavier than 99% of the electric cars that have been sold in Australia. So EVs, are they actually much heavier than internal combustion vehicles? No. I mean, sometimes they are heavier, but in general, they're not. In fact, for example, Tesla Model Y, Xpeng G6, they're a pretty similar weight to similarly sized cars that are internal combustion. So that's irrelevant. The other point that's irrelevant is the truth is, like I said, less than 5% of damage done on roads is done by cars. It's trucks because they're so heavy, and it simply makes sense that they're the ones that cause the damage. You'll see on major roads, major trucking routes, you'll find that the roads on those areas will deteriorate much, much, much faster than roads that aren't regularly used by trucks. Now, getting back to the point here, fossil fuel subsidies, what? $14 billion, right? If the government stops handing out all these fossil fuel subsidies of $14 billion, well, maybe this won't be such a problem anymore. Maybe they won't need all this revenue. So if we move away from subsidizing fossil fuels in Australia, then actually that will account for well over the taxes that the government would miss out on taxing electric cars for every single kilometre that they're driven. The other bad thing that this does, honestly, it makes Australia look like a third world country, like a developing country. The rest of the world is supporting EVs, right? In many countries, there's subsidies, there's promotion of EVs. Australia, our media attacks electric cars, and now it looks like the government is about to do the same thing. What are your thoughts? Let me know what you think in the comments.